and answers at the end. So with that, I will introduce Executive Director for Prospect Silicon Valley, Doug Davenport, who will tell you more about the Empower Procurement Program.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Doug Davenport. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for enduring a little bit of our first event jitters. Hey, so before we get started, I just want to tell you about Empower Procurement. Now, this is a program of Prospect Silicon Valley. Prospect Silicon Valley works in the space between innovative technology and those that are trying to advance in the sustainability picture across the energy, transportation, built environment markets. And Empower Procurement is a really important project for us, and I'll tell you why. So California has a huge economy, and I think everybody knows that California is one of the largest economies in the world. Government spending happens to be a fairly large percentage of that overall economy. So what the government sector and other major institutions buy really have a lot to do with the overall kind of sustainability picture for the state. Now, state of California has really ambitious goals for reducing carbon. I believe it's 90% reduction over 1990 levels here in just about the next decade or so. So this is a really big deal, but it just happens to turn out that what we buy doesn't always equate to the same kind of outcomes in terms of sustainability, even when the goals are clear. So, when you look at what, a large institution may purchase, it really runs the gamut from, IT to other products to new buildings and new fleets that they build or acquire, and a lot of maintenance and other kinds of activities through the services sector. When you look at what a public institution, the impact of the public institution has in terms of overall sustainability or emissions, purchasing has an even bigger influence than what they do every day in their operation. So being able to help people connect what they do in their purchasing spectrum to the sustainability outcomes that they desire is a really big deal. Okay, so Empower Procurement is meant to actually work with major institutions to help connect those two ideas. We're doing that in a number of ways. We're going to do that by really looking at the barriers to, where it gets tripped up in terms of sustainability outcomes in the organization and the role that their purchasing organization and other folks have in the purchasing decision. The policies or the rules that are being followed and how those may or may not support the kind of outcomes they desire. And then just the physical system or the tools that they employ to actually buy those goods or buy those services. We're looking across those to find where there might be problems that are actually leading to this issue. I think the important thing here is, as sellers, these institutions buy a tremendous amount of goods and services. They have huge goals and they don't always connect. And what we're here to do is help find ways to unblock that situation and make that an opportunity for sellers of low carbon and high sustainability products and services. Let's go ahead. To do that, we're recognizing this is a really complex picture. So we've broken down the problem into a number of areas. Procurement of products. So that's going to be, the various, widgets, computers, other kinds of physical goods, services and the kinds of services that are being acquired, the use of contracts and specifications in, for example, building new buildings or rehabbing buildings or other things along those lines. Management of major asset classes. In this case, we're really focusing on fleets. And then also the ability for an organization to measure its own progress appropriately and know that it can make actual changes or adjustments along those lines. Kind of all of those focus around a sixth area that we're looking at, which is the overall kind of program or practice that an institution undertakes. So we are working with various folks in the government sector or in the institutional sector. So that's going to be municipalities, that's going to be universities, it's going to be schools, to look at this 6-part picture to find new ways to make the right impact. Let's go ahead. When we think about institutional barriers, and Liang is going to talk a little bit more about this, here's 4 things that we think are really important. Number 1, improve the tools, and we're very lucky to have partners like Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Energy Solutions, the Z&E Alliance, and a whole set of other strategic partners, including Ecomedes, where procurement tools can be examined and improved on the buyer side, facilitating a smoother process and having a way that really produces the kind of outcome that we all desire, looking at what kind of information should be available throughout the process, including information that you as a seller may wish to provide, and then being able to connect with the right kind of pieces of the overall system, such as the design community, regulators, and otherwise, as we look at the major influencers along the lines of a purchasing program. Let's go ahead. So just quickly, we've been at this for some time. We've done a major buyer survey and a major seller survey to better understand sentiments on both sides. We're continuing to work on those 2 ends. We've been building a marketing strategy and an overall deployment strategy, as you can see. And now we're really beginning to launch a set of actual initiatives around these 6 areas. Let's go ahead. So just really quickly to give you an idea of where we are piloting specific campaigns around each one of these areas: products, services, practices, contracts, asset management, and benchmarking. And throughout this year, we'll be launching each one and moving into a scaled set of projects across the state of California with municipalities, schools, and university partners to really start to gather a body of understanding and a body of evidence where some of those problems lie and ways that we can help overcome them. Let's go ahead. So you as sellers have a role to play here. So we're going to be doing this series of events, and we'll be doing this multiple times throughout the next year to really help you understand what we're up to, and also help you provide you some education as to the public sector buying process or priorities or other learnings that we go through. I think one important opportunity for you is to actually stay in touch with us, the Empower Procurement team, on a procurement initiative that actually applies to you. So if you're selling products and you'd like to understand how we are making progress in the product sphere, we encourage you to connect with us and to quote unquote enroll in our products initiative so that you can learn from us and be able to connect in the future with participants that we work with in the municipal sector in that particular realm. And that will be true for all 6. Let's go ahead. So just a real quick picture. This is the larger team that we're working with. This is funded by the California Energy Commission under the EPIC program. We're very grateful to the Energy Commission for putting this challenge together. Our partners, Berkeley Lab, Energy Solutions, and Z&E Alliance are leading these procurement initiatives, and we have major partners in California State University, Ecomedes, Procure, Terra Verde Energy, and the Local Government Commission, which have all been just fabulous partners for us. So I think with that, we're going to introduce our next speaker, and that is Liang Wang with Berkeley Lab. Liang, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, so just a bit background on Berkeley Lab's research about institutional procurement. We are a small research group that supports the Federal Energy Management Program, which is funded by the Department of Energy. So we work a lot with different federal agencies to make the purchasing process of energy efficient products easier. And since the U.S. federal government is the largest single buyer of different products and services in the world. A lot of our research actually directly transferred for this program development phase. So next slide, please. As Doug mentioned, last year we have conducted an online survey that is aimed to understand the different type of barriers that large buyers from both public and private sectors face. And currently, after taking the survey results, we're doing a deeper dive into the procurement practices by conducting interviews with different key decision makers. This will allow us to provide more context as well as a more holistic view of the decision-making process regarding clean energy technology adoption. And finally, we hope to use both the survey and interview insights to identify opportunities to determine effective ways that will connect sellers like yourself to the large buyers, and also integrate sellers into the procurement process. Next slide, please. So through our survey, we found that California buyers really do face some challenges when it comes to procuring new clean energy products and services. The first one is there's a lack of institutional capacity, and that can mean that the existing procurement tools is not sufficient in assisting buyers to purchase new clean tech products. So there's a need to improve tools such as contract templates, procurement platform, and also standard tech specs. And second, there's unclear policies on what should be prioritized. So for those large buyers, they really have a wide range of procurement requirements and goals, and it's really hard for them to meet them all. Third is the insufficient and inconsistent information flow. This can mean that when decision makers are trying to approve a project, they may not have the right or enough information to make a decision, which will prolong the approval process. And finally, there's a lack of buy-in from different major influencers. This also speaks to the prolonged approval process and the need for sellers to get connected with the right person that will open doors for you. All of these challenges really just shows that the procurement process is really complex when you're trying to sell to a large buyer. And that's why we're here, to make the institutional procurement process easier to understand and accelerate the timeframe in which clean energy technology gets adopted. Next slide, please. And in our survey, we asked about how hard is it to buy a new clean energy technology with the existing procurement tools. And more than half of our respondents said that they have some level of difficulty procuring those products. And when we say new products, we don't just mean emerging technologies. It also just means that products that they haven't bought before. So it could be electric vehicles, a more efficient heat pump, or a more efficient lighting system. Next slide. We then asked about where does procurement bottleneck happen? And more than half of our respondents said that gaining approval is very time consuming. And this means that the approver didn't have the right information to give that approval. The second major bottleneck is developing contract documents. This one is interesting because most of our respondents said that they currently use a contracting tool or a contracting template. And this means that the existing tools they have in place is insufficient to meet their needs. Next slide. We then asked about what factors prevent the purchase of those clean energy technologies. Besides the concerns about high cost, a lot of them said that the preventing factor is a lack of buying from top level management, followed by concerns about the interoperability with existing building systems and operational reliability. So the buyers are really interested in seeing more detailed information about how your product will interact with their existing building systems and how reliable it'll be. Next slide. And this data here shows, there's kind of a tug of war between prioritizing lowest first cost versus lowest life cycle cost. And there's a slight difference between what the public and private sector care about the most. So for us to see an increase in adoption of clean tech, we really want buyers to prioritize the lowest life cycle cost over first cost. And in some of our interviews that we have been conducting, we have heard the key stakeholders saying that they are trying to leverage the best value procurement method, which will allow vendors that provide high efficiency or high performing products to be more attractive during the vendor selection process. Next slide. We also asked, so who are the major influencers during those procurement process? And also, again, there's a slight difference between public and private, but this just gives you insight in who you should target based on your customer's profile. So we see the top three are facilities manager, followed by energy manager, and then chief financial office. Next slide. Finally, we also asked what would buyers find the most useful? And a lot of the respondents indicated that a standard technical specs would be really helpful, followed by more chances to participate in group purchasing opportunities, which mainly came from the public sector respondent. And also they want more networking and training events, which is meant to connect sellers to the large buyers, but also there is room for internal networking events to better align energy efficiency goals or decarb goals with the key decision makers. And then next slide. We also compared if they're buying different type of products, does that mean they have different procurement needs? And the data really shows that there's not that much of a difference. There's still a really high level of interest in technical specs for DERs. Next slide, please. So we hope the results of our buyers survey can provide you with some greater insight into the challenges that large buyers can face when they're thinking about purchasing clean energy technologies. I think by understanding the decision-making process regarding technology adoption, it may make it possible for you to approach potential customers in new and more effective ways. Here are just three main takeaways from our survey results that may be interesting from a seller's perspective. So first one, targeting different influencers. Like as I mentioned before, there's different type of influencers that are involved during the purchasing process. So not only do you need to get buy-in from, say, the chief financial office or the senior leadership, you also need to talk with the facilities manager as well as the energy manager. So Empower Procurement is here to help sellers make those connections. Second, it's kind of an add-on to the first one, just knowing how to target your information to the right people. Just the different type of influencers care about different things. So just kind of tailoring your marketing materials to emphasize the information that they care the most about. And the last one is just recognizing that when you're thinking about selling to a large buyer, they really have a unique procurement practice that are really complex. And there's just a lot of different roles that are involved, which is that operates at different levels, and they also care about different things. There's also different rules that influence what they're able to buy and who they can buy it from. Finally, there's also the different procurement tools that they're used in order to carry out those processes. And again, all of that is to say we're here to help you unravel that complicated process and identify the right place to target. And with that, I will pass it over to Christian Hauster from Prospect Silicon Valley to talk about the sellers survey.
All right, great. Thank you, Liang. So now I'm going to be presenting on our DER seller survey. So this seller survey followed the buyer survey. So we took the results from the buyer surveys, turned that into a report that identified opportunities and barriers, and we used those barriers and opportunities to inform the questions that we asked sellers. So our outreach for the DER seller survey was done in fall 2019. We started outreach on the survey, basically a little bit of the mechanics here. We just went and did research. We were looking for DER sellers that were selling into California institutional procurement channels. Just to recap, in case anyone's not familiar with the term DER, stands for Distributed Energy Resources. So we use that interchangeably here with clean technologies. What we're referring to is technologies ranging from EV, EVSE to mRNO products such as lighting, HVAC, anything that is using energy at a site that has the potential to offload the usage from a centralized grid out. So we started off doing research, compiled a large list of just sellers who were selling into these institutional procurement channels, and ran into some barriers with getting folks to respond to our survey. So Prospect Silicon Valley, in partnership with the team from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, switched gears, and we ended up going out to the most commonly used bid platforms for state and municipal procurement, such as Planet Bids. The state uses Cal eProcure, and then we sourced a lot of contacts directly from the county sites where procurement occurs. And we found that those were a lot more successful places in which to source our contacts, primarily because there was interest from those sellers in trying to make their bidding to these RFPs and RFQs more successful. Another really useful channel was the local builders exchanges throughout the state. So we did outreach to 29 builders exchanges. Then we also did outreach through other various seller channels such as incubators, accelerators, and consultants. The buyer survey was split. It was a bifurcated survey. So if you were a DER seller who sells a product or widget directly to a buyer, then you would fill that out on the survey, and you would be directed to a set of questions that were specific to a product seller. If you had an energy service where you contracted with a large buyer and you provided energy services to them, or you were a contractor, then you were directed to a different part of the survey. By and large, the questions were very similar. The language was just different. However, there were 2 to 3 questions that were specific to products and services respectively. For the purpose of this presentation, I've focused only on questions where there was a similar question between products and services. But in the full report that we'll be providing to everyone who attended this webinar at some point in the next month, you'll be able to see the more specific questions that may pertain to a type of seller that you may have a specific interest in. So for the seller survey, unfortunately, we didn't get as large of a sample size as we did for the buyer, but there's still some useful information in there. So this is the question, the first question that we asked that was basically the gateway question, determined, what type of seller is going to be filling out the survey. So you can see manufacturer, software provider. Those are 2 examples of products. And if you're an ESCO, if you're a contractor who provides services, if you're an architecture and engineering firm, then they would be directed to the services part of the survey. So the responses for our survey were overwhelmingly products. I think that's one thing that if we had a larger sample size, we definitely would have wanted more services, but the information was still very valuable that we got from the majority products respondents. And then if we're looking at product-specific sellers, what markets are they selling their products into? Overwhelmingly public sector for the response to our survey. However, technology is a key private sector market that was also of high interest. And services was more or less the same, looking mostly at local government, higher ed, state government, with technology being the highest scoring private sector. And a little bit more kind of behind the scenes here, we used the responses to both the buyer and the seller survey to inform the development of the procurement initiatives that you saw in the intro slide, that wheel where you saw product services. We're starting out our initiatives with market sectors that represented the highest interest from both the buyer and the seller side respondents to our surveys. So the next question pertains to really the essence of what Empower Procurement is all about, is of the following market sectors you're working with, which of the following do you see as being engaged on energy efficiency or green procurement issues? We define green procurement as purchasing products that cause minimal adverse environmental impacts. So again, state government, local government, higher education, but also technology, market sectors are scoring really high here. And likewise for services, saw a little bit more in the higher education market sector, but overwhelmingly public sector responses. Now, that could possibly be informed by the fact that our outreach was done, as I said, through these commonly used bid platforms that are being used by public sector entities. But I will say we did quite a bit of extensive outreach to the private sector, and it was much harder to get traction there. I think that signals both that there is still overwhelming interest from public sector market sectors, but there's a lot of potential there with the private sector as well. So the next set of questions, who do you first contact when attempting to sell to a new organization? For products, the highest scoring questions were procurement officer, facility manager, and sustainability manager. Other scored very high too. Some of the job titles under other were president, CEO, management, or protection engineers. And then some sellers said they sold directly to internal product groups at large buyers. And then for services, facility and energy managers scored much higher. We didn't see anything from procurement officers. But more on this later. I think it's interesting to compare the responses here, base it, and compare that to in the buyer survey, where we saw the most important decision makers on the procurement chain being from the buyer perspective. So the next set of questions, do you feel that you are currently adequately able to access large California buyers? From products, we saw over 60% said that no, they're not able to. If we look at the reasons why, what are the barriers that are preventing access? Overwhelmingly, lack of connections and business relationships, and lack of information about upcoming RFPs, solicitations, and RFQs. Some of the answers that were provided in the other section included lack of interest in investing in new technologies that don't have the proven technical specs available, not enough resources as a startup, and one that I found really interesting is that it's this seller noted that it's very hard for buyers in their experience to switch suppliers. Another interesting one was there aren't enough standardized RFPs or procurement processes for DER technology providers, such as advanced controls for microgrids, DERMS, and other emerging grid technologies. And despite there being lots of interest, that ultimately impacts the purchase and the market overall getting traction in that regard. So smaller sample size here with services, which may have led to there being a yes for 75% of the services sellers said that they feel they're adequately able to access large California buyers. Could also be that the services market just is able to get a bit more traction because they're more able to do the development work and manage services projects rather than selling a widget that someone at a buying organization would have to know how to install, how to make interoperate with the other technologies that they have at their facility, etc. And if we look at the reasons here, if there were barriers from those that selected no, it scores very similar to the buyer, to the products, where lack of connections, lack of business relationships, lack of information about upcoming RFPs and RFQs. And finally, this question was asked to both sellers of products and services, asking what kind of services or program material from the Empower Procurement program would be valuable. And overwhelmingly, networking events with institutional buyers scored very high. We also saw educational and training events and training on how to respond to requests for RFPs, requests for information, and RFQs. So finally, just a wrap-up slide, what does the seller survey tell us? Public sector buyers continue to be a key target for clean energy technology sellers. This is probably likely due to an emphasis on energy efficiency and green procurement issues. As I pointed out, I think this means that there's definitely a lot of opportunities in the public sector space, but there's also a private sector that is ripe for potential in terms of learning about the market that is out there and understanding how they can better their procurement processes to also increase their uptake of DER technologies at their organizations. The next takeaway would be that the primary contact at a buyer organization may not be the key decision maker. So we saw in the buyer survey slides that Liang presented that the key decision makers may not necessarily be the same personnel that are being contacted by sellers as the first sale opportunity. So that's really important to understand. If you're trying to get into these organizations, you need to not only understand who you're reaching out to, but you need to understand who they're going to get approvals from in order to consummate a purchase. Next takeaway is networking and connections and info about RFPs and RFQs are very high priorities for sellers. And that's good news for us at Empower Procurement, because those are two things that we are hoping to provide with you through this grant-funded program over the course of the next few years. So finally, just to wrap up, wanted to note that we have a report, the Buyer Barriers and Opportunities Memo, that basically is going to cover in great detail what Liang presented on today. And we'll be making that available for you after this webinar. And we have a Seller Barriers and Opportunities Memo that is taking the results of the seller survey and doing a lot more analysis on that too. And we're going to be making that available when it's released in the next coming month. So thank you all, and I'll be turning it back over to Cynthia.
Thank you, Christian. So this is the part of the program where we are going to want to hear from you, from our audience. As we mentioned at the beginning, the Empower Procurement program is actually gathering a lot of intel and data throughout different procurement initiatives, throughout different parts and different players in the procurement process. And we're getting a lot of information about different roles, rules, or tools, creating best practices. And this will be a series that is ongoing, and we will have more webinars after this one so that we can then report those insights back to you and be able to help you make your procurement more successful. So we are going to ask for your help with a short poll. You should see it in your screen now. These are a few upcoming topics that we have considered. please pick the ones that you'd be most interested in learning about so that we can then organize more webinars and more programs with your needs in mind. So we'll give you a few seconds to complete that. And also, please do not hesitate to send any other topics that are not listed in here that you can think of. You can use the Q&A chat function to make sure that we look at those as well. And with that, once we have determined that we've got all the votes in, I'll leave that to the production team. Thank you. We will move on to addressing questions and answers. So if you haven't yet put in your Q&A through the chat function, please do so at this time. So we've actually had a question come through, and I will just, this is a very general question, so I will just post it to any one of our panelists to be able to take that. How can a seller get involved with our procurement initiatives, or PIs for short? I don't know, Doug, if you'd like to take that, or Leanne. I know there's a few, we can use an example of PIs that we have involved in the past, like the contracts PI or practices maybe.
Hi, I was leaving a little white space for Christian Hostler to possibly answer, but maybe he wasn't able to see the chat. So folks that are, primarily products oriented or sales oriented, or they're in the buildings industry and would like to kind of connect with what we're doing on specifications, or if you happen to be in the fleets industry and you want to be involved with what we're doing with electric fleets, you can enroll with us. We will provide information to help you enroll, quote unquote, into that PI, that procurement initiative. When that happens, as we talked about, you're going to receive insight as to the progress in that PI. You're going to receive kind of directed content that we're generating as we learn. And there will be workshops in the future that will involve both the participants in the initiative, so that would be multiple, let's say, municipal government partners that are working with us, or other institutional buyers, and those of you that actually enroll in those PIs would actually be invited to those workshops as well. So there would be an opportunity to be kind of connected to folks that are actually trying to push the needle on finding better sustainability outcomes for what they purchase. So we think that this is providing a good amount of opportunity to kind of complement the kind of instruction that we can provide here.
Great, thank you. We have another question that just came through. So with virtual networking being the primary method of connecting sellers and buyers, what have we learned or researched about best practices in this new modality? I would say that we have found that there's still a lot of reception, people are very receptive to virtual formats for conferences. For example, one of our thought leader partners, the SPLC, just hosted a virtual forum a week ago, and we saw a lot of procurement professionals be able to still attend. I would say maybe something to be mindful of is the fact that many of our assessments, for example, are now conducted through a Zoom call, video call, phone call, which originally would probably have been in person, but we have received the same level of quality for the data that we are being able to gather from this exercise. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that with LBNL's guidance and their experience in working with our partners, we were able to create a tool with the right questions, right? So if you have the right questions to ask and you're guided towards the right person to ask those questions to, you should still be successful in this virtual world. And that's also partially why we want to make sure that we help you through Empower Procurement. Any more questions? Okay, well, if there are no other questions or comments, it looks like we are able to wrap up, but I will give all of our speakers today a chance to give any last words of feedback or anything you'd like. Oh, and now we are sharing, we have your poll results. Thank you so much for that. And we see that you're all very much interested in learning more about industry trends at a statewide level. So we will definitely keep that in mind, and we will input it into our program development. Thank you so much. Panelists, I will leave it up to you if there's anything else you want to add before we wrap up. Otherwise, okay. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.